Hello and welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. This episode is the first in a series of discussions we'll be having this year on innovation. Innovation has become one of the big buzzwords in the digital age, with organizations and even countries aspiring to be more innovative. But what does that mean? And what can we, especially in the Caribbean, do to better nurture and ultimately leverage innovation? These are some of the questions we would like to answer. Joining me today to kick off this series is Professor Patrick Hosein, who we had on the show last year to discuss country-level, top-level domains and the Trinidad and Tobago Network Information Center, TTNIC, for which he is the CEO. In addition to TTNIC, Professor Hosein is a highly regarded educator and has been a presence in the electrical engineering, computer science, and IT departments of the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. He has worked for several major telecommunications companies, including Bell Labs, AT&T, and Ericsson, has won several awards, and holds over 30 patents, many of which in some way underpin the telecommunication services we enjoy today. So based on his illustrious career in engineering and education, Professor Hosein will be sharing his thoughts on education, innovation, and how innovation can be better fostered in the Caribbean. Enjoy. Prof, welcome back to the ICT Pulse podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me again, Michelle, and thanks for such a warm welcome.
Well, it's so true. I had to consider editing my introduction because it would have cut into so much more time had I gone through all of your accolades and all of your achievements.
Well, I'm thankful for you to give me this opportunity to express some of my ideas or beliefs in innovation as it relates to the Caribbean.
Excellent. So I guess let us jump right into it. And I think where I want to start is, as you say, innovation. It has become this buzzword globally. Almost every country, including those in the Caribbean region, want to be the next Silicon Valley, whether the Silicon City or whatever it is. In broad terms, what are countries doing wrong?
Okay, well, if innovation was that easy, you would have countries like China and India creating Apples and Googles on a monthly basis, right?
Mm.
So as we've seen, it's not that easy to be innovative, especially when it comes to high tech. So several countries are trying to replicate, Silicon Valley. But in many ways, that's not easy to do, and especially in third world countries, it's even more difficult because of the lack of resources, etc. So what I've seen in our country, in my country in particular, Trinidad, there's a lot of talk of innovation, but the focus has been more on, I would say, sort of light innovation, where the rewards are relatively small. So, app development and stuff like that. What we need to do is more in-depth research to come up with innovative ideas that could create larger, more rewarding industries. If you look at companies like Google, it is based on really in-depth research. And that's something we need to focus more on. So in terms of what countries are doing, at least in the Caribbean, we have a lot of investments in things like buildings. You have innovation centers, and we hire consultants to come down and give talks, etc. But to me, the focus should really be on human resources, the human capital, because the people who will come up with these ideas are the younger generation, the graduates from universities, etc. And I don't see that as being a heavy focus today. We would have these innovation centers. We would bring in some people, some students to come up with ideas. But unless you compensate these people well, it's difficult to keep them. And a lot of the good ones end up going abroad. I have some very good students who just got frustrated with what happens within Trinidad in terms of the flexibility in work, the type of work they get to do, etc. So What are we doing wrong? Basically, I think we need to, educate our bright students, and but also try to keep them by rewarding them in terms of giving them interest in work, flexibility in terms of working hours, and of course compensation. But from what I found is in many cases, once I give my students some interest in work, that in itself is what people are looking for. I personally, when I look at jobs, the first thing that comes to mind is it going to be interesting for me? Am I going to get up on a morning and say, oh, I want to go on and solve this problem? Not so much the money. The money is useful as well, but yeah, interest in work, flexibility, given the ability to work when I want to work. Many of the innovative people don't come up with ideas between 8 and 5. They come up with ideas at different times, and so having this very antiquated structure where you bring in people 8 to 5 and expect them to produce isn't going to work. So yeah, so it's investment in human resource, and those are the people. The people are the ones who will come up with ideas, not the fancy buildings or whatever else they provide.
Understood. There's some interesting points that you made. I think one of the first things, though, that I want to touch on, because we have a situation where, in many instances, as you had mentioned about, we're not going in depth into the innovation. We are doing very relatively light things. We're having like app competitions and so on, but we're not necessarily drilling down. And what I think may have happened traditionally or historically is that innovation was driven by government in many instances, and defense. So the space race and the Cold War, all of these things drove innovation in many respects that have come down to us as mainstream products. And I guess, would you think that government still needs to drive innovation in the way that you're saying? Should it be the private sector? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think it's a combination. The government alone cannot do it. The private sector alone cannot do it. The university alone cannot do it. It requires collaboration among all three partners. Now, the private sector, when they innovate, it will be mostly innovation for enhancing their particular industry, making more efficient manufacturing, etc. So like when I was in industry, for instance, yeah, most of my time would be focused on improving products developed by those particular companies. So that will continue to happen. Now, if you want to have innovation as we, people talk about Silicon Valley and all these companies that come up, etc. Those were basically developed by university graduates or university dropouts, people who didn't really work in industry. They have ideas. They came out of university and they just went for it. For instance, my son is one of those people who he was doing his PhD and he dropped out and he decided he wanted to pursue his startup company. So I think universities should play a bigger role in innovation when it comes to this other type of innovation, as opposed to private industry innovation. In terms of the government, there's a lot of room for innovation as well, improving efficiencies, making better use of data, etc. So there's room for innovation in government as well. Now, what needs to be done is universities need to have some platform or some model that would allow their students to work with an industry and as well as government and come up with innovative ideas for both, as well as what I mentioned before, coming up with unique ideas that could create the next Facebook or whatever. So I don't think government alone should do it. I don't think private industry alone should do it. But I also think that university has to play a major role. Universities are the ones creating the innovators. And they need to create innovators who are interested in the type of work that they will be doing in industry. Or they could create startups or spin-offs, but they need to create patterns and startups. In our case, again, we have to keep remembering we are different to some of these developed countries like the US. So we need to focus on specific areas that would benefit us as a country, but would also be of international value to other developing countries. We cannot compete, for instance, with self-driving cars with Google, so we need to focus. And with the support of industry as well as government, we can do that. And for instance, one thing I have my students do is, in addition to doing their more theoretical research for their thesis, we also work with industry. So we work with companies such as Massey and Sagico, etc., to work on real problems that help the industry and is also publishable. Whatever we do in industry, we also do it in such a way that there should be some publishable aspect of it.
Understood. Actually, there are now two questions that I want to ask. The first one has to deal with resources, because in trying to change, the paradigm, as you're suggesting, whereby we go deeper, all of the various education, business, and government ought to all be involved. We tend within the region to have a challenge of what I would say is limited resources. And what you may find, therefore, is that fostering innovation takes a lot of money. How do you think we could address that, or what maybe could be arguments that could be made that may justify the spend?
Okay, well, again, it all comes down to focus. What we should focus on, or what is beneficial to us. You can innovate in various areas. Hardware, developing body sensor devices. Smart watches, smart cars, all that. But those things are expensive. So what we need to focus on is more software related innovation. So let's look at something simple as Facebook. Initially it was just a website that people registered to exchange ideas with friends, etc. So in terms of resources, initially it wasn't that resource intensive. It was mostly software. Again, in our case, we could focus more on software related innovation as opposed to hardware related innovation, which is very costly. So a lot of the things my students work on, for instance, doesn't require any expensive equipment. In some cases, we need high performance computers, which could potentially be expensive. And I sometimes have to look around and try to find colleagues in Korea or the US who have resources that we could use. But the type of work we do is on improving efficiencies of industries, for instance, or improving revenue in social networks. And these are all algorithm-based innovation. All it requires is software development. And in some cases, we need some high-end hardware, but there's no need to have our own specific hardware to perform this type of research.
Okay.
So in conclusion, yes, it could be innovation could be expensive, but it depends on the areas you want to innovate in. In third world countries or developing countries, the type of innovation we need to focus on is on things that would help us in terms of improving efficiencies, looking at things like climate change, and solve our local types of problems, which in many cases may not require expensive equipment.
Definitely. And I think before I go to my next question, and maybe you may have a response to the statement that I'm going to make, because I think sometimes we think of innovation as this sort of very involved and, very complicated construct. And yes, in trying to solve a problem, it may take you down, a particular rabbit hole. And yes, there may be complex things that you may need to address along the way. But I do agree that to a considerable degree, we ought to be trying to solve real world problems and our own problems. So I think sometimes we get sidetracked by the word innovation. And we think that it has to be this huge and sophisticated thing. Like unless you're creating the next Facebook or Google or something, that you're not being innovative.
Oh, yes, no, I agree fully. And in fact, some of the best innovative ideas are the simple ones. When I was in industry, I would come up with a simple idea and I would discuss it with a friend. And he would say, well, why not patent this? Because this is really useful. But to me, it was so simple, I didn't see it as being something patentable. So yes, innovation doesn't have to be this complicated thing. Just making use of data. Just to give you a simple example, we did some work with our library. We looked at data that they had about subscriptions to journals, etc., and usage of those journals. And we were able to optimize which journals they should subscribe to, and that saved them, quite a bit of money. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about potentially millions of dollars. And this was just a simple optimization technique where we use historical data. We optimized what the objective, which was to minimize the budget required for the journals we needed. And we were able to save them quite a bit of money. So again, I agree with you. Innovation doesn't have to be this very complicated thing. It just requires very unique ideas, and sometimes some simple math is all you need to solve it.
Understood. And just now focusing on education, I think one of the things certainly coming out of my sort of education experience is that and at the university level, one needs to develop certain skills and knowledges which, are crucial to just, giving you a good foundation to do whatever it is that you may need to do in whatever field that you're in. But sometimes I think, and I can only probably talk primarily from the Caribbean academic system, is that there's such an emphasis on passing and, studying to pass your exams that it may not necessarily in and of itself nurture a sort of innovative environment where, for all intents and purposes, you're encouraged to think outside the box. So oftentimes you really, as a student, spend a lot of time trying to prepare for your exams and to pass your exams to get a degree. And I mean, certainly your experience as a lecturer and how what environment you create for your students might be a little bit different. But I don't know whether or not currently the education system in the Caribbean is much different from what I experienced back in the day.
And yes, and I agree again that I think our education system needs to change. So, for instance, when I first returned well, not the first, but the second time I returned a few years ago, I recall that one of the first exams I had to create, I included a design type question. Basically, it wasn't there was no single solution to it. It was basically asking them to design something, and I wanted to see what different ideas they would come up with to solve that problem. And when I brought it up to the second examiner, he said, "No, we can't. I can't provide that question because they wouldn't know how to solve it." So that's when I realized, we don't really allow our students to be creative in coming up with solutions to problems. They are used to having, fixed problems that they've solved similar problems before, and they know how to solve these. And anything out of that environment, they don't like, and they complain. So what I've been trying to do is, try to bring in some of this creativity in other ways. So I know I can't change the way we teach the courses, but what I've started doing now is taking some of the bright undergrad students and having them do research with me and have them bring out their creativity in solving problems. To be honest, the students who come into the university as an undergrad, fresh and full of ideas, and they want to do all sorts of different things. But because of the system we have, they just get frustrated over time because they are, as you said, they are just focused on passing exams. And as to whether they retain that information later on, it is questionable. But what I found is if I start off with some of these undergrad students who are interested in research, I work with them and I allow them to work on real world problems. If they are lacking in certain areas, they just take online courses, etc. So the thing is, our students are capable of that creativity, but the system we have right now doesn't allow them to express it. It's also not only in education, but also in research. The way we have been supervising most students is they come to us and we say, all right, well, this is a problem I need solved. Go and solve it, and you write that up as your thesis. The way I work with my students is I say, no, you come into me, I say, tell me what problem you want to solve. And it's completely different to what they're used to. But eventually they understand what I mean, and they go out there and they try to find a useful problem to solve for their thesis. And that aspect of it finding a problem is, to me, the most important aspect of a researcher.
Definitely.
The solution, once you have a good model for a problem, the solution falls out. But we focus so much on solutions to problems that the students are not able to come up with models or problems or formulating a model for a problem. So you take them out into industry and say, all right, well, this company has this problem then that it needs to be solved, and they don't have a clue as to how you would model it before coming up with a solution. So to me, the biggest thing I try to teach my students is how to focus on coming up with problems, and that's actually where the innovation comes. Innovation comes not so much in the solution; it comes in finding a problem that has to be solved or that should be solved that would be useful to your community and or the country. And the second part, of course, is coming up with a good solution for it. But that tends to be a little bit easier than formulating the problem itself. So my feeling is focusing on problem formulation as opposed to solution is what we should be teaching, but we don't. Yeah, so that's my say on that.
Okay. So in terms of the problem formulation, is there like a standard sort of methodology, or is it something that sort of, let's say from your own experience, trial and error, you have sort of developed some sort of approach that you share with your students? How does that work?
Right. Unlike solutions, given a problem, there are ways, standard solutions you would apply, etc. Problem formulation is this is where creativity comes in, and this is something that you kind of learn with practice. I mean, I've been in industry for so many years that when I see, if we go into a company and they talk about some of the issues they have, I could see in my head how I would formulate it to solve it. But that comes with time. It comes with experience. But by showing examples to students and having them practice on their own. So if we go out into industry and we speak to a customer, then I will come back and say, well, ask the students, well, how would you go about providing a solution for them, and give them a chance to formulate the problem. And in most cases, I would have to help them out. But that practice of looking at a real world problem that isn't in the form that you're accustomed to in academia is to me the most interesting part of research, and it's the most rewarding part of it. But that's something we haven't focused on a lot in university. Now in when I went to school, we did spend a lot of time in that on those aspects of problem formulation.
Yeah, because sometimes too, in speaking with a customer, the problem that they think they're having is not the problem really. And, you as the person who's trying to help them to solve a problem need to recognize that and try to somehow drill down to what the actual problem might be.
Exactly. In fact, you should be a researcher, Michelle, because, when we talk to they think everything is fine. They see, all our operations is running fine. And, we would say, oh, well, let's have a look at ABC. And we get some data from them. We go back and we do some, algorithm development, whatever. And we come back to them and say, if you did this instead, you could save or increase revenue by 2%, 3%. So we actually quantify to them the benefits, but the company themselves, since their operations seem to be working fine, they don't see the benefit in some of the things we offer. And we have to quantify the gains for them. And sometimes even then they are skeptical, but once we show them in practice what they can achieve, then they go for it. And especially, unfortunately, in Trinidad, because we had so much oil money, a lot of these companies didn't worry so much about efficiency because they were making money.
Mm-hmm.
And but now, we need to really make things more efficient. And you could come up, innovation is where you could do that.
Definitely. And let me ask another question in terms of patterns, because when you're talking earlier on, and I realized though that we in the region may not necessarily put a lot of value on patents and I guess by extension, intellectual property. But I wonder within the whole sort of creative mindset, how important do you think we is developing and nurturing a culture of having patents to the region?
Well, I think it's important, but I think what tends to happen is that we don't do our homework first, and so I've seen people apply for patents on stuff that, but I personally wouldn't have patented myself. Having worked in some of these industries like Bell Labs, where when you come up with an idea to be patented, you have a committee of experts who would evaluate it and make sure that the company could make a profit of at least 100,000 or more, or even sometimes in the millions on that patent before they actually pursue it. So regionally, there is potential to come up with innovative ideas that could be patented, but we need to ensure that we don't do it for the sake of having a patent.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of people do that. They want a patent. In other words, let me put it to you this way: a patent is something unique, and you could come up with anything unique and file a patent on it. Whether it be used is a different story. So when you file something, you should not only show that it's unique, you should show that it has some benefit to society, or there will be some gain from filing it. And typically, this requires in-depth research. So just to give you an idea, like in industry, if I came up with an idea for an algorithm, I would have to show that it produces something close to optimal, or if not optimal, prove that there's nothing else that would improve upon it. Because if you invest, 100,000 US in filing this particular patent, and then in 2 years' time, somebody else comes along with something even better, then you've wasted that money. So we would have to prove that whatever we did was provably better than anything that could come along. And that requires in-depth research. Sometimes you would have to do some advanced mathematical proofs to show that nothing else could be better, etc. So coming back to what we do locally, yes, we do have ideas that should be patented, but we need to do a better job at proving that it is beneficial, and it will be beneficial for several years to come. And it's only then those types of patents would then be useful on the international market. And we could potentially make have royalties internationally.
Understood. Yeah, that certainly makes sense, because it does take a lot of money as well as time to file a patent, and at least it ought to be of value in the long run, and not necessarily something that one is doing driven by ego.
Right, and also applicable to. So for instance, last year, one of my ex-students and I filed a patent on something related to pricing for quality of service for wireless communications. It's not something that would be useful to Trinidad, but it's something useful to Korea. So she happened to be in Korea doing some postgrad work. So we filed it in Korea, where it would be useful, but it would not have been useful in Trinidad. So we didn't even think about filing it in Trinidad. Now we are working on some other things that are useful for Trinidad. One thing in particular, because of our smaller size, we came up with some ideas that could be potentially useful. So we are pursuing patents as well. But as I said, we just need to be careful that what we file is worth filing, and we're not just doing it because we want a patent.
Right. Okay, Prof, I think that is about me almost done now. I think let's just begin to wrap up. And I think whether or not you may have any final thoughts, because we did touch on quite a few things, particularly in respect to the fact that we probably need to go deeper with innovation in the region, and not necessarily just maybe look at things, pretty superficially, or looking for sort of quick fixes or quick wins in that regard. And certainly in terms of the compensation structure, not necessarily just financial, but also in terms of environments that facilitate individuals being challenged and excited to stay in the region and pursue that kind of work. And I think there was also another point with regard to even like the work culture, whereby we probably need to consider more flexible time and work hours. As you said, innovation doesn't necessarily happen between 8 and 5. So there's probably a lot to chew over, but any last words or
Yeah,
thoughts?
well, as you said, yeah, there's still a lot to chew over. But some of the other issues we have, in academia, for instance, is collaboration. We tend not to collaborate as much as we should be. Again, innovation comes about when you have a diverse set of ideas, and you get those diverse set of ideas by collaborating across multiple disciplines, multiple departments, multiple faculties, etc. So that's one thing we need to that wall we need to break down and have more collaboration among people from different departments, etc. And that's a major challenge. I've been trying to collaborate with various people, and especially in AI stuff, artificial intelligence, because a
Yes.
lot of the problems we work on is related to social problems. Some things we work on, for instance, is we recently did some work correlating the type of research that we do within the country. We correlated that with research done at other countries of a similar size, etc., to see whether or not we are doing research that would benefit us as a country. So those types of things requires collaboration with people with knowledge in those areas. We need to collaborate with people. If we're doing work in health analytics, for instance, we need to collaborate with faculty of medical sciences, which we do. So we do have some successes in collaborating with engineering, medical sciences, etc. But we need more of that collaboration. We need more of what I mentioned before, treating our bright students better in terms of flexibility, compensation, interest in work. Especially, the government has a lot of scholarship programs, and these returning scholars are really bored when they come back because they can no longer continue the research that they started abroad. And that's one of the things I try to do as well. I try to bring in some of these returning scholars and work with them on to continue the research that they did before. So there's a lot that can be done, and I have to say my principal is very, very supportive of what I do, and I'm very thankful for that. Unfortunately, some of the people lower down on the ladder are not as supportive, and that's another big issue. All the
Right.
politics involved. So yeah, I think there is hope, but it will take quite a bit of time to get there.
Absolutely. Yeah, because and I think, as you rightfully said, I think the problem needs to be tackled on various sides. So government, within the education system, and even in private sector as well, because all of them, to varying degrees, facilitate the enabling environment that is required to nurture innovation and to help us to better address some of our own challenges internally within the region or within specific countries.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, industry that's another thing. Our local industries still see us in academia as working on theoretical ideas, but some of them are starting to realize we can help them. So as I said, we've done work with companies such as Massey and TN Tech and Sagicor, and eventually we need to prove to them that, yeah, we in academia can help them solve their problems, and there's no need for them to go abroad anymore to solve some of these problems that they have. So that's another area we need to push in, improve that trust in us as being able to solve some of their problems.
Definitely. And granted that some of them too may not be prepared to invest in solving the problem. One wants to be able to get this solution that you just pull off the shelf, and maybe you customize it in house, or maybe you get somebody, a third party, to customize it, but not necessarily to be able to have a problem addressed that is unique to you and your situation.
Yeah, and I mean, I could continue on and on with all these issues, but another big problem we have is, because of our size, some of the utilities, for instance, use software that was developed for some of these developed countries with much greater populations. So the software that they use is overkill for what they need. So they are paying for software, millions of dollars for licenses for software in which they just need maybe 5% of the functionality.
Right.
And this is where we could come in. We could provide the functionality they need for our specific needs. But they are so used to going for the biggest and greatest out there, not realizing that they don't need it. So that's another gripe I have about the local industry.
Okay, well, Prof, you know what? On that note, because as you say, I guess we could go on, and probably again we may. I'll keep my cards open to schedule another session with you at a later date when perhaps we can tackle this issue from another angle.
Yeah, sure. I would love to talk about research itself and some of the research we do, especially in AI and IoT and all these new technologies. Yeah, so we should have something just specifically on research at some point.
Okay, then. Excellent. And I will definitely hold you to that, because I think we all would love to get a better sense as to, AI and many of those areas, and certainly what might be happening in the Caribbean that the average Joe may not know about on those fronts.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much again, Prof. And I hope you just have an excellent day.
Oh, and thanks again for the opportunity, Michelle, and look forward to speaking again sometime in the future.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.